Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of that NextGen Planners Podcast. As always, you are here with me, Amelia Hamilton, your head of community at NextGen Planners, and my two wonderful, wonderful co-hosts, Clara Metcalf.
Hello.
And Taylor Beavis.
Hello.
Welcome, the two of you. There's not just three of us in the studio today. We've got a wonderful, wonderful guest. And that guest comes in the form of Ash Weston, who is the head of Managed Portfolio Services at 8am Global. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Very smooth. I liked all of that. It was great.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about your job title before. It's
malleable.
Malleable, sure.
Endlessly evolving.
I would say it was just hard for me to remember. There's just a lot of words.
Yeah, animal husbandry, falconry, whatever you want. I can add
Animal husbandry. What's that?
Isn't it is it just
care
general
for
animal
animals?
care?
Yeah.
A lot of my friends went to I'm showing myself up straight away. A lot of my friends went to agricultural college.
Oh, wow. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, big animal. There's a lot of horse stroking, I think, in it.
That would explain the gilet earlier then.
Great, cool.
Yeah.
Now I'm out. It's straight away.
G-aid for the podcast. Yeah, very good.
Great.
Before we get into things, we, on the podcast, are asking our guests to set the first question for the next guest coming up. And your question today was set by Carl Dines. And I will say it's one of the more abstract thank you, abstract questions that we've had so far. I'm very intrigued to see what your answer is going to be. But the question that Carl wants to know your answer to: who would win in a fight?
Right.
A kangaroo
Yep.
on a skateboard
Yep.
or a monkey with boxing gloves? And why? I want to know the reason why.
Okay. So Carl wouldn't have provided you with the follow-up with detail about the scenario.
No.
So if I ask questions, can you guys fill in the blanks on the question? Because I think it depends on the answer.
Okay.
There's only two.
Okay.
Both animals are of regulation size.
Yes.
Regulation size kangaroo and
Normal
regulation monkey.
zoological
Yeah.
size.
Great. Take straight away. Accuracy.
Yeah.
Great. Are they on an incline?
It's a hill.
Okay.
Ooh, on a
The
hill.
skateboard's moving.
And they're moving down the hill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next to each other?
Pretty close.
I feel like this is wow. Okay, we're in the dream palace together now. This is great. Okay, no, it's got to be the monkey because it was a monkey, wasn't it? Chimp
In the
Like
boxing gloves,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I know we've said monkey, but I'm imagining a chimp, and I recognise those are
Yeah.
two different things.
That's fine.
The accuracy is key. I think the kangaroo has very strong legs, but they are engaged. They're on the skateboard. They're going down. So what they've got is they've got some of these guys, and we've all seen the buff, like sexually ambiguous kangaroos.
Yeah.
You know, chest. Lovely.
We've all seen
We've
them.
all
Yeah.
seen them. We've all spent hours.
Don't you lie. You've seen them. Yeah.
And that's great, but then they're not super maneuverable. So it's monkey. He's darting around. I think they're quite fast on the ground. I'm really vividly imagining it now, so like it's kind of it's genuinely a little bit haunting in my head. But I think is that sufficient?
Perfect.
Is that enough justification?
Yeah.
I think so.
I think so. I don't know. I mean, either answer is right, I guess. It's
I
up
guess.
to...
About perspective.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Thanks, Carl. And you've got the rest of the episode to think about what your question is going to be for our next person. I'm not asking you yet.
No, I know. But what I like is that Carl started a very weird precedent. So that quite naturally, I'm like, well, I've got to make it weirder than Carl's. And then every single point, the guy's like, oh my God.
Yeah, we're going to have some strange... We're going to have to reset at one
I
point,
know.
aren't we? And just go back to, like, what's your favourite colour? So that everybody's, like, nice and bland.
Even
Yeah.
like golf.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Great. I
I
don't
can see this wildly getting out of control quite quickly.
Okay, well, let's get back on track then. So, to give people some context then to who you are and what you do,
Yes.
do you want to explain what your title actually means?
I'll do the boring bit. Yeah. So
Yeah.
do you want like a 10-second
Yeah.
what I do in the little CV thing, right? Cool. So I've been doing this for the last 10 years. I was an advisor briefly for 2 years before, working for a network that shall not be named. But I transitioned into doing this around 2015, I think the start of. And essentially, I design, build, and distribute multi-asset investment strategies for advisors normally, but it depends on the client. So it's about, some of it's building stuff to order. So we've got a specific objective, a specific target market, don't lose money, not do lose money, don't lose money, produce the greatest return over this period, be very cheap, be whatever the brief is for it. I've run pretty much every style. If you think of the most extreme passive, there's no value in active, uber cheap stuff, all the way up to very, very active and very, very, I use the word institutional, I just mean, very banky and product orientated stuff over here and kind of everything in the middle. And at the moment, I think we've got something like 60 or 70 different strategies of different flavors. So I think I offer a pretty good, unique view of different ways of running money and the yes and the no and how it all fits together. So yeah, I was going to keep going, but no, that's good.
No.
That's fine.
Longer than 10 seconds, but shorter than I thought it might be. So yeah, I'm great.
The whole energy of this, just like 10 seconds, great. Give me 3 minutes. It's fine.
No, I mean, I think that's a great place to start. And I think, talking about many different ways to approach a situation is useful, because I think sometimes in this industry you have individuals or people or companies who go, this is the only way and this is the right way and the other ways are the wrong ways, and clearly there's many, I was about to say ways to skin a cat, but I actually don't like that phrase.
It's quite aggressive.
What's a different way of saying that?
I don't know. I can just think about kangaroos and monkeys at the moment.
Yeah.
Think of cats.
Okay, to get back on track, I want to bring in things from clarification corner.
Yes.
Because we've been chatting obviously before we had you on the podcast.
Obviously.
And we found some interesting statistics, and Clara in Clarification Corner always brings wonderful statistics for us. So do you want to read out some stuff that you found out so we can bounce some ideas around?
So, interestingly, from a money marketing article, they're saying that there is a firm out there who uses 6 DFMs on its panel. And also in that article, it was saying that actually that's not abnormal. And a lot of firms do have 5 on their panel, maybe 4. So actually having just 1 or none is more rare.
Different DFMs, we're saying.
Different DFMs. Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess a place to start then is, obviously I said there's many different ways to go about a situation. What's your opinion on then not even within a DFM having different things, but separate DFMs? Do you think that's a positive thing? What's your kind of opinion on that?
Part of it is organically going to happen. So if a firm exists for more than 5-10 years or so and grows, it's like sediment in rock layers, right? So my dad still has an advisor firm that started about the same time that I did, being alive. And over the period of time, this is all and I'll use acronyms so people set their laugh, something pre-RDR, certainly pre-consumer duty. And so the journey of firms transitioning from what was happening, say, 30 years ago to now, the way advice has changed obviously shapes largely the investment stuff that people would recommend. And the old way of doing it was, well, obviously, whoever had come to see you most recently, some representative from firm 1, 2, or 3, that's the new hotness. And then you use that for the tranche of clients for the next 6 months, a year, until someone else comes along with a new idea. Not to, it can work. But the old way of doing things was obviously very data limited. So advisors were limited by who came to see them and what was provided. So quite often, older firms are going to have a lot of legacy tranches of money run in different ways for clients that at the time, for usually the right reasons, were convinced that a way of doing things was appropriate. And sometimes there's value in that. If ignoring the kind of organic drift of there being all these chunks of stuff stuck together for old firms, and let's say this firm's picked 6 of them, say, I want to have 6 now, are there 6 different legitimate styles that you could justify having? I don't know. I think a good, controversial, I think a good CIP has certainly something very efficient and low cost, certainly something very bespoke on one end of it. And that's not to say those outcomes are going to be massively different over the short term. It might simply be that something needs to be built bespoke for people. And I think a firm does have to pick a lane when it comes to broad investment styles in the middle. It doesn't make sense to me when we've got 6 or 7 providers all doing different things, and let's say they're all in the we're going to make you money over the course of 20 years multi-asset space. They cram them all together and they go, well, they're all diversified, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it's like, well, no, certainly not over the last 5 years. And people forget that even though investment processes can be incredibly diverse, the outcomes over short periods of time can be very, very similar. And then the client looks at these 6 or 7 names, and I think if the advisor's trying to treat them like it's like sort of running racehorse and go, well, this one's winning and that's good. Well, in my understanding, when advisors do this, they're not moving the client's money from one to the other. They're sort of providing plausible deniability in the narrative to say, well, this one's not doing very well, but this one is, don't worry about it. I think a better and more positive client relationship is when you're, as a firm, really bought into it doesn't have to be a specific provider, but certainly an overarching way of doing things. You get that information across to the client, and then you reinforce that over the course of time of engagement. That's got to be a much better client relationship than just, we've picked these 6 things doing different things. One of them will work. And as I'm putting words in the advisor's mouth, there might be a completely legitimate reason. Sorry.
So I think looking at the article, it was sort of suggesting that these were actually on an active panel. And I mean, I know previously we'd spoken about,
we were talking about this, weren't we?
To do with maybe advisors coming on board that have different preferences.
From your experience, do you see where you've got firms that maybe it's a firm created by 3 existing advisors that come together, or they take on new advisors? Do you see that there's a struggle between the new advisors having their way of doing it and the firm having their existing processes? So should the firm try and get the new advisors to do it their way, or should they, or can they have a process where everything can exist together, where these different strategies are all suitable? What do you see?
It sounds like a utopia, doesn't it? I mean, there's some of this is just the dynamics of firms, right? So if you are a firm with, let's say there are 3 or 4 people and another one comes in, like any group of people that's clicky, right? There's a way of thinking, there's a different way of thinking.
Yes.
So for the example, let's assume that all the investment strategies have equal merit. They all work in whatever objective they're trying to seek, and they all offer value, and they're all acceptable.
Yeah.
It breaks down if one of them is clearly terrible, because obviously, clearly don't use the terrible thing. But in that instance, I think it's perfectly acceptable for a firm to have different ways of doing things, as long as the advisor is able to demonstrate the value in a clear way from a reporting standpoint. Because if a firm's got 3 distinct ways and the value being realized for that are all distinct, and the clients are all mixed up, that's nightmare.
Yeah.
If I think it would work if every one of those client banks was distinct. Like it was like, okay, here's Trevor, he's joined us. Here's Millie, she's joined us.
Yeah.
Here's his bank, here's her bank. They are in different ways, but they're responsible for reporting back that the value is there. I think that's okay. You can segment it like that, and these are 2 different things.
And I guess those strategies, like to your point about those strategies could, although they're different, they will have similarities that can be drawn upon. So you could say, as a firm, we make sure that we invest in sort of this way, or we make sure it's diversified, like really high level stuff. That's those 4 things all do.
And that's always the brief that I get. It's like, so I when you go and you go, what is your starting principle? And it might be, okay, our base case is a completely neutral, and that could be neutral to market cap weighting or another objective, but passive portfolio. Great. Anything we add to that in terms of beta or any kind of concentration has to justify itself for value in a tangible way, reportable by the client over a year, 2 years, whatever that period of time is. Great. Others go, no, our base case is we have an acceptable level of charge, and for that we are prepared to have huge periods of underperformance, knowing that the maths tells us the best possible outcome will be here in 10 years time. Those 2 things are not the same. And I think there's this, a lot of the time people just go, well, surely you just want the best number. Yeah, sure, okay, great. Over what period of time, over what level of cost, over what level of capital access? That there are a million knobs and dials to play with to make the thing work. And it's normally what a firm wants is it's a motive, because it's normally either based on the founder or the group of people that have come together. What is most important to them when it comes to talking to a client about investment, and then baking that narrative. And the word narrative makes it seem soft and qualitative, but that's the stuff that the client's going to resonate with. I can show the most compelling data to a client 20 times. They don't care. And nor should they. They're going, what is my value system, firm? What is my value system, client? Lining those 2 things up, and then picking products, investment or not, that align with that and reinforce it. And it's just, I think people, and a lot of this, I unfortunately, is the kind of online echo chamber of, and if spend more than 10 minutes on LinkedIn, you'll see someone going, right, I found this singular bit of evidence and data that supports this singular way of thinking, ergo everything else is rendered null. And it apart from being unhelpful to the overall discussion, and part of the problem, in inverted commas, with this calcifying, no, I'm right, you're wrong, it's not real. It's not how actual firms work at a fundamental level, unless it's a firm with 1 or 2 people in, and it's very, culty.
Yeah, and it can kind of go like that a little bit. What's your view on advisors running their own models? Are they qualified enough to, do you think?
Caveat, it depends on the objective.
Okay.
So if you are running a passive book with a rebalance schedule which is fairly long, and that's documented to the client, and they understand what they're getting, and they understand the risk of, yes, you're exposed to this single market, something could happen, we expect 1-for-1 losses, and then whatever all the normal blurb is for it. I think that's doable. I think that's absolutely fine. I think if you're offering any kind of mechanical oversight beyond that, it's not a skill thing, it's just a balance of data, licensing, and hours in the day thing. There's this massive, well, maybe it's less so nowadays, but there was always this massive misnomer that investment managers are, certainly not brighter, but they have access to all of the screens and the data. That stuff's all been democratized now. Everyone can access it. It's more just the time to sit there and focus on a singular task, whether you want to be focused on being a holistic planner or something else. From a business perspective, I don't think it's a great idea, because you're tying your business and brand to a way of working which is completely divorced from, well, not divorced, it's entirely linked with the outcome. And so from a value perspective for the client, if the strategy does go wrong, well, you've got nowhere to go from a client narrative perspective. I don't think it's a problem to tie in the value of what an advisor does with selecting third parties to do specific parts of the job. Now, obviously, as a DFM, I'm massively biased, and of course, I'm going to go, outsource everything, don't run anything yourself. But genuinely, some of this stuff mechanically can work. It's understanding that whenever you recommend anything, you're making a promise. So everyone goes, well, no, we're recommending something which is very, very neutral. The value is very long term, etc., etc. Well, it doesn't matter what you say. When you tell a client that a thing is going to work in a certain way, you're making a promise. And so every time you see the client, they're going to call you, consciously or subconsciously, on whether or not it's delivering that. And if you feel that you can continually deliver the thing you said, and let's say that objective is very basic, no problem at all. That's great. But I see a lot of advisor-run books where it's like, we're really fundamentally understand everything this fund's doing. I've got to tell you, the market changes, the underlying fund team changes, everything changes about it. The only thing that remains the same about a fund over any given period of time is perhaps the manager's viewpoint as a sort of lens, but everything else is moving. And whenever we take on an advisory book, the number one thing that everyone says normally after about 6 months is, oh man, I was never looking at it with this level of detail before. And it's not to vilify anyone, it's just a matter of fact. You only have a certain amount of time to look at this stuff, whereas that's all we do.
That's your job.
I am interested in, you mentioned before some of the things you're looking at in terms of your relationship with an advisor and what you want to get out of that. When you're kind of working with an individual or a firm or whatever, what are you prioritizing in that relationship? What do you think is important? What do you think, from your perspective, an advisor's really looking for from you? How do you approach that?
It's really interesting. So there are what the advisor, and I say advisor, it can be anyone we work with, but what the client normally wants is they're trying to extract value from us. What I'm normally trying to do is break down any sense of hubris or pride on their side to begin with, to work out what they're truly after. So there's this, the stat I always tell people is, people, especially, people have been doing this for more than 10, 20 years or so, feel like they have a handle on how the market operates and how everything fits together. And I always remind people, I go, well, okay, I'm 36. That's not my first name. By the way, guys.
Hi, I'm Ash. I'm 36.
So I was born in 1987, and the actual data that supports how the markets operate in a modern way sort of isn't going, maybe early 80s or so. So we've got about 35 years of data to say this is how things work. People go, the markets have operated since the 20s. Yeah, they have, but they're not in the same way. The data wasn't the same. It's really, you've got a sort of 35-year span to learn from. And a lot of people, I think I mentioned this earlier on, with this sort of calcified view, come at this and go, right, I've looked at the data and the answer is X. And so I spend a lot of time to begin with kind of breaking that down, that assumption, and going, it's okay not to know. We can build lots of rule sets and lots of product here to achieve very specific aims. But as soon as you try and tie in, as a lot of people do, this intrinsic value to this outcome over any period of time, and I know it's kind of a weird answer, but it's what I'm trying to do is to break that down, because it's a very emotive process running this stuff together. And so if the client can't let go, to some extent of the ego involved in it, then it's not going to work, because as soon as you're emotionally involved in all the decisions, you won't sell stuff, you won't move. The sort of rabbit in headlights thing is it's a justifiable response if you care about your clients' portfolios, right? So if something bad is happening in the marketplace, the two things that happen is people either overreact or underreact. They never just do the right thing, which is Occam's razor somewhere in the middle. And it sounds really. So I'm not trying to work with robots. It's just going, as soon as you've got people involved in that are way too emotionally involved with the outcome, you're going to make poor decisions, and it's going to be reactive one way or the other. So it's such a long answer. I'm so sorry.
No.
Because you're asking a very sort of like, what am I looking for in terms of a relationship? It's weirdly about going, are you someone that we can work with and understand the limits of your own function and understanding? And you go, great, cool. Was that helpful? I don't know if it was.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think so. And I think we'll dig into it a little bit more. But first of all, we're going to take a little quick break, and we'll be back with you in just a second. Hello, everybody. I am Amelia Hamilton, and I am your head of community experience here at NextGen Planners. And I am here to give you a little bit more information about the Tech Stack Show. The Tech Stack Show is a weekly show here at NextGen Planners that happens every Tuesday at 9:30 a.m, where you can join me, Adam Carolan, and Francois Dutoy as we dive a little bit deeper into the world of tech. In the show, we have our brilliant AI newsreader. We send me back to the future, which you will have to tune into to see what that means, what that entails. We also have a brilliant guest from the world of fintech who we get to interview, and we have the crash tech dummies putting themselves and their reputations on the line, testing tech and AI so that you don't have to. So how can you join? Well, you can click the link at the top of the community, which enables you to join our live stream every Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. We can't wait to see you there. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. Just before the break, we were talking about relationships with advisors from your perspective.
Sure.
Because I think it seems to be the case that advisors often aren't 100% satisfied, let's say that at least, before we dig down into the statistics, with the relationships they have with DFMs and are wanting more from it. So to give some kind of context to that, Clara, can we go to clarification corner? Can we have another statistic to kick things off?
So it feels very, what's that program with the, I can have a consonant.
We need a noise. Like
Countdown, yes.
It feels very countdown, doesn't it?
Dictionary corner.
Yeah.
I was going to say sliding doors. No.
So the stat is that 2/3 of advisors are not satisfied with the level of information that they're getting from their DFM partners for consumer duty purposes. This is not getting the right levels of information, I guess that they need for their own reporting.
What do you think?
Yeah.
I'm just going to I'll throw it at you. Yeah. What's your view on that?
Okay. First, it's the journey from DFM back in the day, where everyone was charging 400%, to MPS as we are now. So, and I always say to people, remember, we're at a place now where the MPS provider, we're going to generalize and say DFMs are up here, charge variability. Let's assume when they say DFM, they mean MPS provider, because normally the data fees for the DFMs are normally fairly direct because they have to be for the charge basis. For an MPS provider, we're in this weird hinterland where most of us are charging about the same as Netflix. You know, that's roughly where we are. With a client with 100 grand with us, we're genuinely charging less than Netflix. And so there's probably a scalability problem with smaller firms in terms of data provision. By definition, if you're talking about, what was the stat, 2/3?
2/3.
Yeah, because you go half based on the market, just dividing in the middle.
So it's obviously quite an issue for a lot of providers. It's not.
Yeah, because is it data concerning the duty with respect to value? Because I'm big on, when selecting anything, you've got to be able to demonstrate, is the thing working in some tangible, quantitative way and relatively consistently, otherwise how are you going to recommend it? And I suppose if a lot of the providers are, offering a traditional product, which is, a person or a group of people saying, I'm going to make good decisions on your behalf, trying to codify that decision-making is something which is incredibly sensitive on this side of the fence, because you're trying to attribute value in a way which is making you look very, very clever to justify that value over the course of time. You know, we're in an industry whereby, because of the effect of compounding, if you run 2 lines with the same stuff and one makes 0.5% more in year 1, you run it for 20 years, you'll seem like a genius because the thing compounds over time. There's always going to be reticence on the DFM side to reveal everything. Once again, I think it's terrible. I think everyone should be very, very open with the efficacy of what they do and how they do it. But I think in order to satisfy properly the spirit of the duty, not just what is required in the boxes, because what's required in the boxes is pretty straightforward. You know, I do the returns for all of the mandates we run as well as our standard stuff, and it's not that onerous. You can, you know, is your fee relatively sensible? Great, within the pantheon of everything you can sample, cool. Are you achieving the objective over the minimum investable period? Or yes, hopefully. And if you're not, is there a mechanical reason? Can you address that? Like, I don't think that's particularly challenging to do, but they're probably talking about all the supporting information around that. So if you just do your basic return, which is once a year, I am doing a good job, everything is fine, and then there's nothing in the interim, or
it does sound as if it's to do with how the information is actually presented and how clear that is for advisors to understand.
Okay. So they're probably producing like a quarterly biffle, which is, here is, you know, a long, probably fairly impenetrable document about our view, and we've done this and everything's great. I'm going to gently make this point that if everyone involved in the process could see the extreme volume of information and data available, and then what's plucked and taken as an example of a good thing, a bad thing, etc. And I've made the point already when it comes to making an argument about anything, but specifically when it comes to reporting about whether you have done a good or bad job, I think, especially if you're writing qualitatively, you can mask all sorts of nonsense just by going, yeah, it was fine, we were unlucky on Japan, or whatever the narrative is for it. Maybe it's an old industry, new industry thing. I don't know. Two-thirds genuinely surprises me. I would have thought there'd be a grumpy half, which would make sense. But yeah, 2/3 is a lot.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, you go.
I was going to say, what from your view, what do you think would be like a few things that you'd like to see change in this space? So in the kind of DFM MPS space, so where you're operating, what could change to help either advisors or help advisors to help their clients?
Sure. Some form of definable metric for the value that an investment is seeking to achieve. Now, that's so biffle. Let me try that with normal words.
Yeah.
What we've all accepted is, here is a line, here is another line, here is a given period of time. And it's 3 years, it's 5 years, it's 10 years. Hopefully that's applicable for the period of time, and as a line to go, maybe this will happen again in the future for my client. Probably won't, but maybe it will. What there isn't are any metrics beyond simply over the last period the line is higher than the other as to whether or not something's working. So if you go and look at a new investment product tomorrow, there will be some sort of quantitative process. Even if it's people picking stuff off the wall, there's some process in there. They will be measuring the value internally as to whether or not that system's working or not, whether or not it's a very quant thing or a very qual thing. It doesn't really matter. They will be monitoring that. But the problem is, because every single person does it differently, every single firm has their own, we've invented a process, and it's, 3 sticks of celery versus, and it's always some abstracted idea about how to manage value. And none of these things line up. So all we've got to work with, or rather all the advisor has to work with, is the output. And you go, here's a static period of time, that appears to have worked, I hope it does it again. And with the best will in the world, you can do all the due diligence you want, but it's the job of the distribution team of the product to convince you it's a great idea. And obviously all the good stuff's happened because they're geniuses, and all the bad stuff's just bad luck. If there could be an agreed metric to go, yeah, this is the amount of value above a neutral benchmark that this product has added over the course of time. And I know that there are financial ratios that can produce that, but you've got to set them up very specifically as to what your baseline assumption is. So it's like going, the last 10 years, I'm not surprising, if you had a market cap weighted portfolio with the US in, being that the US has given you this and everyone else is giving you a small punch in the face,
it's going to skew the data.
Yeah, and everyone goes, genius. And it's like, well,
why?
Hindsight bias is a real thing. Great. Clearly that would have been a great place to be, and that is more important than a lot of the small stuff over the short term. But people never adjust for that. They just go, this line is higher, ergo it's better. And so I think we do have all the information. It is possible that we could produce a quantifying metric to normalize for that and to go, this adds some value over the course of time.
So you're saying sort of like a consistent way of producing something that allows us to compare you all.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So the framework would be, so if you normalizing for for allocation within a given window. So if you're a provider, you're trying to outperform a benchmark, right? And that is defined as probably a rough group of peers that are trying to do the same thing that is applicable to your marketplace. So we know that advisors like things that have between this and this amount of equity and fixed interest. Great. So we'll benchmark against that and try and beat it. Now, if you take a sort of big old bunch of that and try and outperform, well, that's great. You can produce that data. It's all right. But what it doesn't account for properly is all the decisions that have been made in terms of Fund 1 over Fund 2 and slight tilts to market cap or geography or anything else. Now, as soon as you go into that, it's immediately too complicated, immediately too granular, and no advisor is going to have time to pick through the reports that one very complicated report's going to have over another. It's not possible. AI, maybe, 2 years' time, maybe we'll look at the reports. But at the moment, it's not fair to expect them to do that or possible. But if there was an agreed metric to go, one, allocation adjusted, how good is your decision making when picking one investment style over another? And that's not saying active or passive, it's just when you are doing something left or right of your agreed neutral position, is that working with any level of consistency? And then separately, nullifying for that, when you make an allocation call, geographic call, whatever, how often is that adding value? Now, that's terrifying because I know hedge funds that go, we're right 51% of the time. And they're like, great. And that's only a little bit better than a random walk, but they add value because they're doing it just enough to make the line go up. So it's terrifying, I think, on the distribution side, if you actually open them and go, yes, this is how right and wrong the thing that we do is, because the first person to do it will be lampooned because everyone else will go, well, we're very right. Oh, don't look at the one that says there, that's sort of right half of the time, etc. So I'm sorry, you asked a really, the answer is transparency, right?
Yes.
Like a value rating system.
Yeah.
Value and ad rating system. It'd be great for Consumer Duty.
Yeah, well, and let's not get started on okay, so there are ways of quantifying the value of stuff on the marketplace from risk profiling providers and data aggregators.
I was going to ask you, stop right there, because you're coming on to my question.
Okay.
So the question then will go now to this point. So risk profiling. So when we're looking at, certainly from my experience as an advisor,
sure.
One of the things that makes my life a lot easier is if the portfolios are risk profiled on a solution. So let's say independently.
Yeah, sure.
And that's kind of where my question
they
is.
are independent. That's not what's wrong.
In terms of it's not a pay to play system in the sense that to get your portfolios on those systems is free, but to have them risk rated is not a lot of the time, right? And it's extremely expensive. So we've got, from what I've understood, but this is what I want to ask you, I could put my portfolios on there so that somebody could look at them, but I've had scenarios where for a client, I can't risk rate it. So therefore my process as a company, I can't fulfill because I can't evidence that. But if they pay X amount to this company, they'll give them a number for that portfolio. What's your experience with that?
It's a massive barrier. I don't want to put a hard number on it because it's genuinely terrifying, but it is the single largest expense for the business.
It's just crazy.
By a huge margin. It is a distribution cost. So what this should be is, here is data that is relatively low cost, brackets free. We send it to providers. They aggregate, and using their own methodology, rightly, wrongly, stochastic models vary. They're categorizing it as a 4, a 5, a 9, a 12, whatever.
Yeah.
And we should understand that methodology and try and build solutions which best align with that. Fine, no issue at all. Going down the debate of like the rightness wrongness of the maths is like a 5-hour podcast about going, is it right to put people in linear boxes? That's hour 6.
Yeah.
The actual problem is that the cost for doing that, and they usually are year 1, year 2 breaks. So they'll go, you're a smaller provider, so we'll let you go in at rate X for a period of time. You literally can't get on them until you've got enough interest from advisors. Advisors can't use you until you're on the risk profiler. So between like year 2 and 3, it's almost impossible. You just, at a certain point, you have to go, okay, we're just going to spend all our money, be on the risk profilers, and hopefully that's enough as a shop front to do it. It's genuinely, considering what's being, I understand like there are very few competitors. I mean, the space isn't that crowded. I know there are lots of little ones, but let's say there are 4 big ones, and they dominate 80-something% of the marketplace between them. That's great. There's almost no reason for them to change because the maths is, rightly or wrongly, pretty much fairly standard between all of them. There are different bells and whistles for all of them. But the I don't want us to be a poor. It sounds like poor us. We have to pay money to be risk profile, but it is a barrier for new and interesting ideas to come into the industry. It is massively weighted towards the incumbents because the cost. I almost want to say the number, but it's just awful. So yeah, it's a huge problem.
But it's big. Big problem.
We're running out of time. We are as much. I've got loads more questions I want to ask you, but we've got to get your question for our next guest.
Oh right.
So before we round off this podcast, do you have? Well, no, you have to have. It's not an option. Give me a question for the next guest. It's a demand rather than a request. How do you want us to open our next podcast?
It's so difficult to have something not unbelievably strange. What is the highest place in feet that you've woken up extremely hungover?
Wow, I love that. Now we're all doing it. Thinking.
My brain
I panicked when you asked me, by the way, because I definitely haven't been thinking about it at all while we've been talking. So that was just genuinely off the. So hopefully that's fine.
That's a great question.
Good.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it in my head there.
It's aeroplane, or it might be mountain, or because it might be something weird. I don't know. Maybe it is.
So woken up hungover.
Yeah. So
do you think anyone in space has ever woken up hungover?
Oh, I don't know.
I'd hope not.
I'm not gonna.
Do you think they have space alcohol?
Is our next guest coming in from space?
Well, who knows? But they maybe have space alcohol.
Spoiler alert.
Somebody who's been on a big night out and then they had to do a sky jump the next day.
Yeah.
Oh no, because they wouldn't be asleep in the plane.
I would accept. I would accept
knocked
micro.
Out.
Yeah, no, but I would accept knocked out. I would accept micro sleeps. I would accept anything like that is fine.
Okay.
That has
that kind of weird sleep where you go like,
jolt.
that's
a hypnic jolt.
Is that what it is?
Well,
maybe.
We'll have to talk to our next guest all about it. But yes, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights, your opinions.
Insights are strong, but I appreciate it. Yeah.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Anytime. Yes, and thank you to everybody for listening. We'll be back next time with another brilliant guest and podcast episode for you. In the meantime, if you want to listen to any of our previous episodes, you can do so on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and also on our website, which is www.nextgenplanners.co.uk. And you can find out loads more information about us and our community there. But yeah, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the NextGen Planners Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can find all of our previous episodes on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and on our website. Also, there is where you can find even more information about our brilliant community. And finally, if you can, do leave us a review. It really does help to grow the podcast.